Hello and welcome back to the Karma Stories podcast. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a single story for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. A little bit different today though, we're going into the comments section for this single story and reading a whole bunch of other awesome stories. You'll find they tie together very nicely. The Karma Stories podcast is published to all major podcasting platforms, and you can also read along on YouTube under our @Karma Stories podcast handle. Alright, on to this story and comments, let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Without Dennis Nedry, How My Friend Got Paid to Find Creative Ways to Sleep for 19 Months. I have a very good friend who maliciously complied her way into getting paid for essentially doing absolutely nothing for 19 months. It was a government job, no surprise there. She and her colleague worked in a state office that kept track of plague cases among prairie dog towns. They were super busy trapping and testing all summer, but once winter comes, prairie dogs hibernate, so they ran out of work. They told their boss via email there was no more work to do for the season that first autumn, and their boss responded by telling them to stand by for reassignment. So they did, for months. They didn't want to be accused of theft by just clocking in and out and leaving, so in the very beginning, they organized some storage spaces very slowly, cleaned their office several times, organized paperwork and that sort of thing. When they ran out of crap to do, they started sleeping, doing schoolwork, Sudoku, what have you. Initially they slept in turns, so someone was always available if anyone came to check in on them. But when it became obvious no one was coming, they stopped bothering. By summer the following year, when the prairie dogs came out of hibernation, she thought her work might resume. The whole office, all the employees in every department, received an email from someone high up informing everyone that particular department had been cut. Don't know if it was unfunded, or they got all the data necessary the previous summer, or that particular pet project of some politician was forgotten about. But somewhere along the line, the state fish and game axed the project for whatever reason. Nothing was mentioned in the email about her job status, so her and her coworker continued to go in and do nothing. She'd tell me about making a giant binder rubber band chain and roping two office chairs together facing each other to sleep in the seats. She's only 5 feet tall, so she fit relatively well. Making a nest under her desk and moving the largest copy machine out of its cabinet and sleeping inside. They made sure the security people saw them periodically throughout the day, and they were on camera. Anyone above them paying attention would have noticed, but no one ever took the time. They dodged folks in the other departments for fear they'd get told on and just minded their own business. They rarely had much interaction with other employees anyway. Eventually, she ran into her boss at a show and she asked my friend where she'd found new work. My friend didn't lie and said she still worked there. Where? Where you left them. She said you should have seen her face when the lady put the pieces together and realized what was going on. The jig was up, and she and her colleague were let go that following morning via email before they went in. Because they had technically worked there for so long, I think 2 years was the threshold, they both got a little severance package. In case you're wondering, they got to keep their pay since 1. They had proof they informed their boss they had no work, and she clearly saw the email and responded. 2. They still showed up. 3. They did exactly what they were told. And 4. It wasn't their job to make sure they actually had work to do. They both qualified for unemployment to boot. Neither of them used the unemployment since they had both been feeling like the gravy train was sure to derail any day, so they had new jobs lined up. OP added an edit down at the bottom with a few more things that their friend did to pass the time. It says, one autumn, he and her colleague decorated the shared nap hiding spot, a walk-in storage closet, with miniature Halloween decorations, and then reenacted scenes from Hocus Pocus. She spent a whole lot of time editing Wikipedia for grammar. She learned to knit, then she learned she doesn't like knitting. Her colleague downloaded plans from the internet on how to make a personal flying device, think jetpack, and tried to make it with office supplies at 1/16th scale. They knew it wouldn't fly, They just wanted to see if they could build what it would look like. During Christmas, they wrote all new jingles about how bored they were. There were 14 completed songs in total, and they recorded them on a little mini tape recorder she still has. Her colleague went to night school, evening school really, and did his homework during the day. By the time they were finally let go, he was just shy of becoming a paralegal. He did finish school and went pretty much straight into a job, and all these years later, he's now a real estate attorney. Good for him. We invented Uber and Lyft. That is, they worked out a solid plan for a non-taxi ride service that would work based on ordering a car via the internet. This was before smartphones. She wrote a bunch of serial killers in prison and told them how disappointed she was in them. She never received a reply. In another edit, OP said, "A few people DM'd me and asked what she does now. She got a glowing reference from the state job and went on to work at our city zoo, and then got her certification in wildlife rehab. She now works as a public outreach coordinator for a big cat sanctuary. No, she does not miss her old job of either juggling plague-ridden prairie dogs or being bored out of her mind." In the comment section for this one, you might be surprised how many people shared really similar stories about being at a workplace and being completely forgotten. I figured, why not jump into a couple of them here? So let's do that. The first one comes to us from Night Manager. It says, "A guy I worked for sold his company and joined Big Blue as a consultant in his company's field. He was assigned a mentor to help him transition from being an individual entrepreneur into a member of a large organization. He was to journal his feelings every day, and then join a weekly group session to discuss. After a couple of weeks, the mentor stopped attending. They continued to meet, and a couple of weeks later, they reached out to the person in HR who hired them all. The HR representative had left the company. They reached out again to a higher level, and they were told to continue with their current assignments and someone would contact them. So he continued to stay at home and write in his journal. It took 18 months before they realized what was happening and laid off the entire group. He was making $250,000 a year keeping a journal about how effed up his large organization was, and how an individual owner would never let this happen." Another one in the comments called Don Shakar said, "I have a similar story, except there was no malice. About 45 years ago, I worked as a research assistant in one of the social sciences departments at a high-level university. Think 1 or 2 levels below Ivy League. I was known in the department, and one of the lecturers approached me and asked me to do a content analysis on some open-ended questions in a questionnaire. I had never done content analysis before and told her so, but she insisted I do the job and offered 3 months' salary for 9 hours a week. A nice windfall. I accepted and started to do the job, but by the second month, I realized it was not something I could do. I came to her and told her. She was very nice about it. End of the month, I got paid. Okay, I worked some during that month. End of the next month, the money comes in. I go to her and tell her this was a mistake and they need to take the money back. She says, it's okay, I did my best, and she wants me to get paid. Nice of her. End of next month, the money comes in. I go to her, she has no idea how it happened. I go to the office responsible for grants, and I get the story. They have a certain discretionary budget for research. If they don't use it up, next year the budget will be cut. So, since I'm known as a good worker, they decided to throw it my way. I ended up getting 9 months' salary for a month and a half's work. I don't even feel guilty about it because during those times when there was no research budget, I worked for free. So it more than evened out, but it still makes me smile." Another commenter called The Real Tinfoil 666 said, "My brother had a friend who kind of did the exact opposite. A large firm had 2 different departments, each with a vacancy for a direct support IT comms tech. These roles were to be managed and funded by each department, because the actual IT department tended to deploy their staff the way they wanted rather than in the interest of the departments. This was back when corporate PC network use was dramatically growing, and good techies were hard to find. They decided to have common interviews for the 2 openings, but separate vetting and hiring. They each had completely separate managers, budgets, etc. Both departments were in the same building, on separate floors, but much of the IT and phone infrastructure was in the basement. You can probably see where this is going. Both departments offered him a job. Initially, he did not realize this and thought there was an email glitch, so he responded and accepted the job twice. Except, of course, he actually accepted 2 jobs. He was able to spend time on both floors, fixing issues, recommending purchases for software and hardware, etc. He was able to keep both departments humming along without issues. This was pre-smartphone, but he carried around 2 beepers so he could quickly respond to anyone's needs. He collected 2 paychecks somehow. This apparently lasted for more than 3 months when one of the department managers bragged to the other about their excellent IT guy. And when they compared notes, they finally figured out what had happened. The thing was, he had done an excellent job, and both groups were perfectly happy. Dude was allowed to quietly resign from both jobs as he had another job lined up at another company, and neither boss wanted to admit how they had screwed up. Another great one in the comments comes to us from PT Sorrell. It says, "This kinda happened to a guy I knew in the Navy, way back when, late 90s. The job I did required a high-level security clearance, and a lot of people would show up without one, or at least with the investigation still ongoing. So it was common practice to have them phone muster, and in a few weeks, their clearance would come through, and they'd badge up and start to work. It was generally used as a time to get settled in, find a place to stay, and a car if needed. The general, I'm new here type stuff. Well, I was in the barrack and we'd hang out at the pool table and drink and stuff. This guy starts showing up, and we became friends. After a while, we asked what command he was with, and he told us it was ours, and said he was waiting for his clearance. We had been hanging out for months at this point. We were all surprised and asked what the issue is, and he said he doesn't know, but had been phone mustering every day and had a log of when he called in, who he spoke to, and what they said. This was based on advice he'd gotten from someone else early on. Months go by, a year, 16 months, still nothing. This kid was being paid to hang out at the barracks and drink and learn to play the guitar. He actually got pretty good after a while. Finally, there was a command-wide urinalysis. He never got notified. The jig was up. The CMC, who was a very large, very angry-looking Samoan, came storming into the barracks screaming for this dude. When he was found, he was in PT gear with a full beard. The Master Chief started ripping into him and ordered him shaved and in uniform and in his office in an hour. The kid was, with his phone log in hand. Kid showed up and starts getting yelled and screamed at and told he was a total piece of crap and his career was over, and you get the idea. When he finally got a chance to speak, he explained what happened and showed the CMC his phone log. Master Chief gets real, still takes the book, and dismisses the kid, telling him to report to him the next day. CMC goes to the security office and starts asking questions. Long story short, the office gets torn apart looking for this kid's file, and it can't be found. They go as far as to start tearing cubicles apart and finally find the kid's file. It had slipped out of an overfull inbox, fell between a desk and a cubicle wall. The kid comes in the next day and is told he's not in trouble as he did what he was supposed to do. The kid started working directly for the CMC until his clearance came in, and he spent the rest of his tour on the watch floor with a great story to tell. Let's keep going. Another commenter called Wing in Vegas said, I had a slightly similar situation years back. I was hired by a consulting company to handle some project management for their client. The training I got included a coworker reviewing with me the various systems we needed to access on the customer network, pull information into a number of spreadsheets, then schedule a testing session with multiple people and send them all copies of the spreadsheets in advance of the system testing. So this process took her about 4 days, then the time to do the testing, so overall they did tests about every 2 weeks. After a week or so of training, I asked why they had to enter the data from the network sources into each spreadsheet separately, and then do the manual transfer of all the spreadsheets to each user involved in the testing. I was told that was how they wanted it done. Part of what I noted was she was going into a system, getting data, and adding it into about 6 spreadsheets one at a time, the same data. Then going back for the next data element and putting that where it went, etc. So I took the 6 spreadsheets, put them in one workbook, did cell relations so that when I entered something it went into all the cells that needed that at once. Then had a few cells with formulas doing fairly simple calculations. She was doing the math separately and entering it, and said they didn't trust Excel to compute the figures because they had trouble before with that. So now, her 4 days of work took me about 5 hours over 2 days. Then I would hold the sheets to email to the testing team until the end of the week to not upset anyone and to not stress the testers. I watched a bunch of videos and also did some training classes for over 2 years. Since it was work from home, very comfortable. Another commenter down below called El Celdo said, I kinda got lost after a merger. I was the expert go-to guy for software they were dropping, so my expertise wasn't needed, aside from a couple people who may have questions, since the software account manager stopped taking our calls once they found out we were dropping them. Big long story, they were right to be that pissed. So I sat around for a year, answering some emails throughout the day, but mostly I wrote on my hockey blog. Then the day they shut it down came, and I got let go with 13 months severance, full pay and benefits for 13 months, or until I found a new job. Then I got a payout of the rest of the money. Honestly, such a good package. So I had 2 years of nothing to do, and I actually got a raise for the second year since I didn't spend $500 a month commuting. Do we keep going on these? I think we do. We have another comment from a user called Ola Gori. It says, 20 years ago, I used to work for a huge telecom company that was previously a public service and got privatized. Many employees were actually civil service officers with very specialized skills. They had a secure position for life, and it is impossible to fire them. With their skill set obsolete, they received some training, but managed to get transferred from department to department without actually achieving anything. The only thing they had to do is show up at work and be willing to work. Out of frustration because they caused more issues than actually producing anything of value, most of them were told to stay home until further notice. I was hired to work in a new department for internal recruitment. One of our main goals was to get them back into employment. We had a certain quota to fulfill to justify our existence, so we hired some of those people for our own department. One lady was in her late 50s, and all she had done in the past 5 years was planning and planting her new garden. She was actually quite relieved to have finally something worthwhile to do. Okay, maybe one more. We have another commenter called Ichigoli. It says, I have a friend in a somewhat similar position. His department was reorganized, and by happenstance, all of the department responsibilities were parceled out to other departments. But emails regarding their former responsibilities still go to him to solve. He gets paid to forward emails to the right department, then reply to the customers with the solution. He's basically a server relay, but the big boss sees he's coordinating and sending out a lot of emails, so assumes he is super vital and treats him like the golden boy when in reality, if they just updated the staff directory, his job would evaporate. He can only appear that productive because he isn't actually doing anything. I absolutely love all these stories about forgotten employees. We actually have a story on the YouTube channel from before the podcast started. It's called Forgotten Employee American Dream. It's a 55-minute long video, and it's a story about a guy who basically got paid to do nothing for an extremely long time. It is so well written. I'll put a link to that in the description on both YouTube and on the podcast, so if you want to check it out, I highly recommend it. If you enjoy daily Reddit stories, I encourage you to follow and add us to the favorites on whichever podcasting platform you enjoy the most. And if you're watching and listening on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.